Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we're traveling high above the mortal world to a realm of thunder and prophecy, jealousy and fate, the world of the ancient Greek gods. We'll explore the stories of the Olympians, the titans before them, and the tangled relationships that shaped both heaven and earth. These are myths of creation, power, love, vengeance, and everything in between. As always, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you're lying in bed, drifting off to the sound of soft thunder, or just taking a moment to rest your mind, this time is yours. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not a void, not a sky, not a sea, nor even a whisper of wind. There was no time, no movement, no light to mark the passing of an age, nor sound to echo the birthing of the world. There was only chaos, an empty, yawning vastness, boundless and dark, the raw potential of everything that would ever be. From this silent chaos, as inevitable as the stirring of thought within sleep, came the first presences. They were not born in the way men are born, nor even in the way gods would later be born. They came into being, suddenly and wholly, each embodying an essential force of existence. First came Gaia, the earth herself, vast and heavy, solid and fertile, the eternal ground upon which all things would stand. Alongside her rose Tartarus, the deep pit, the shadowy cavern beneath all things, black and unknowable, destined to become the prison of gods. From the same murky stillness came Eros, the force of desire and union, the soft mystery that would compel form to seek form and life to reach for life. Then came Nyx, the velvet of night, cloaking the world in her sable wings, and Erebus, the darkness of shadow and the space between. From these formless beginnings, the cosmos began to shape itself, not with order nor with reason, but with the slow inevitability of a tree reaching toward the sun, even when there is no sun to see. Gaia, first and greatest of the primordial beings, bore from within herself a child to crown the heavens. Uranus, the sky, was vast and starry, a canopy arched forever above her. He was her equal in size and force, but it was she who made him, and it was she who welcomed him. Together they formed the first union of earth and sky, and from that coupling came 12 mighty beings who would inherit the world in their image. These were the Titans, 6 male and 6 female, each more radiant and more terrible than the last. Their names murmured like thunder in forgotten valleys. Oceanus, who encircled the world in endless waters. Coeus, master of the Axis and the stars. Crius, obscure and remote. Hyperion, whose light would pass to the sun. Iapetus, progenitor of suffering and toil. And Cronus, youngest and most cunning, with his hard eyes and sharper ambition. Their sisters were Theia, whose gaze bore light. Rhea, who would be queen. Themis, whose presence brought law to chaos. Mnemosyne, memory made flesh. Phoebe, bright as prophecy. And Tethys, the grandmother of rivers. But Gaia and Uranus did not only produce titans, they also bore stranger things, more ancient, more primal. From the deep places in Gaia's flesh came the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants with arms like tree trunks and faces set with blazing eyes. And with them came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, monstrous and vast, each bearing 50 heads and 100 arms that lashed like storms across the mountains. Uranus looked upon these children and felt not love, but loathing. He called them unnatural, feared the strength that throbbed in their too many limbs, and judged them too terrible to walk the earth. So he forced them back into Gaia's womb, shoving them into the darkness of Tartarus, burying them deep in her body where he believed they could be forgotten. Gaia groaned beneath the weight of them. Her belly ached, her veins split with strain, and though she loved Uranus once, the pain he caused her turned her heart cold. Her children screamed in her depths, bound and blind, and her anger kindled like coals beneath wet ash. Gaia, the earth herself, plotted revenge. She called out in silence to her Titan sons, begging one to rise up and strike the sky. But fear silenced them, for Uranus stretched over all things, and even the mighty Titans trembled beneath his gaze. Only one answered. Cronus, youngest and sharpest, who never blinked at pain or prophecy, stepped forward. Gaia, pleased and grim, forged for him a sickle of hardest adamant. Cold and curved, it gleamed like moonlight and thirsted for divine blood. Cronus took the weapon and hid in ambush. One evening, as Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, drawn downward by the pull of his desire and unaware of betrayal, Cronus leapt from hiding and swung the sickle. With a single terrible stroke, he severed his father's manhood, and the sky screamed. The blood of Uranus spattered the earth and foamed upon the sea. From the earth where it fell, Gaia gave birth again. The Furies rose, black-cloaked spirits of vengeance with eyes dripping blood and hair knotted with serpents. The giants were born, huge and violent, their feet rooted in the mountains and their rage as old as night. And from the white foam that frothed around the severed flesh in the sea, a goddess arose fully grown, Aphrodite, laughter-loving and deadly, born not from a womb, but from blood and salt and sky. Uranus fled the world, retreating to the heavens, cursing Cronus with his last breath. He cried out that Cronus too would be overthrown by his own child, that the wheel of fate would turn as it always must, grinding even the strongest to dust. But Cronus only laughed, crowned in blood, holding the sickle that had made him king. He cast the severed flesh into the sea and turned to his brothers and sisters. The age of Uranus had ended. The age of the Titans had begun. The world was young, and already it had known betrayal, pain, ambition, and prophecy. These would not be the last. Not in a world where gods could bleed, and mothers could plot, and children could become kings. With Uranus dethroned and his screams still echoing in the farthest corners of the cosmos, Cronus stood tall among his brethren, the sickle of adamant heavy in his hand, and the air around him dense with silence. There was no formal coronation, no trumpet from the heavens, no divine sanction to crown his rule. He simply was king, as all tyrants are once the stronger hand falls. His brothers and sisters looked upon him not with love, but with the sharp and glittering fear that gathers like frost upon leaves just before the breaking of winter. Gaia, proud of the son who had obeyed her vengeance, looked on with weary satisfaction. Yet the earth knew, even if Cronus did not, that the pattern had already been sown. Fathers fall to sons, and kings do not rule forever. But the world was young, and the Titans rejoiced. For an age, there was peace. The air was thick with life, and the soil hummed beneath the Titans' steps. Mountains grew tall and proud, and rivers found their winding ways through the new lands of the earth. Cronus ruled with the certainty of one who has taken power through blood and will not give it up easily. Beside him stood his sister and queen Rhea, as regal and cold as starlight, her gaze unreadable, and her silence as deep as the ocean trenches. Together they brought forth the second generation of gods, beings who would later bear the names of Olympus, but who, in this age, were only children yet to be feared. The realm of the Titans was vast and orderly, with Cronus seated high, dispensing judgments, commanding winds and weather, shaping the elements beneath his iron will. It was a golden age, not because it was just, but because it was the first. The Titans ruled because they had no challengers, and the world was too young to dream of rebellion. But prophecy does not slumber. It waits. It clings to the edges of every throne and settles into the marrow of the one who sits upon it. Cronus, for all his might and mastery, could not forget the words of his father, hurled like a curse across time in his final breath. One day, a son of Cronus would rise against him, just as he had risen against the sky. That thought, whispered often in the quiet of the night, grew in his mind like a thorned vine, twisting tighter around his sanity with every passing year. And so, like a man drowning in dreams of fire, Cronus acted with cruelty in the name of caution. Each time Rhea bore him a child, he took the newborn god from her arms and swallowed it whole. It was not done in anger. There was no rage in his eyes as he committed this quiet, terrible ritual. Only cold necessity, sharpened by fear. First came Hestia, goddess of the hearth and flame, swallowed while her eyes were still closed to the world. Then Demeter, who would have made the fields bloom. Then Hera, who would have been queen. Then Hades, whose grim destiny was already written in the cold places of the underworld. Then Poseidon, god of the sea, before there was even a word for the ocean. 5 children, divine and immortal, consumed not in violence, but in order to stave off fate. Each time, Rhea wept in silence, her mourning swallowed by the wide halls of Cronus's domain. She grew hollow with grief, her eyes ringed with shadows, her womb filled with despair. And each time she laid on the birthing stone, she whispered to Gaia, who listened in the dark places of the earth and plotted quietly, as she always had. By the 6th child, Rhea could bear it no longer. She travelled in secret to the heart of Gaia's domain, where the earth murmured with ancient memory, and there she devised a plan. When the time came and her 6th child was born, she did not place him in the arms of Cronus. Instead, she gave him a stone, swaddled in cloth, smooth and heavy and silent. Cronus took it without suspicion and swallowed it, as he had the others, believing the threat once more subdued. The child, a boy with eyes like storm clouds and a cry like thunder, was spirited away by Rhea to the island of Crete, far from Cronus's gaze. There, in a cave hidden among the folds of the mountains, young Zeus was raised in secret. His cradle was carved from rock and hung by golden chains from the branches of a sacred tree, so that he might neither touch earth nor sky, hiding him from the reach of his father's sight. Around him danced the Curetes, armored youths, who clashed their swords and shields to drown out the infant's cries, their war dance a lullaby of violence to mask the sound of destiny being nurtured in silence. The goat Amalthea nursed him, her milk rich and divine, and from her horn the cornucopia would one day spill unending bounty. The nymphs bathed him in sacred water and whispered to him stories of the stars. As Zeus grew, so too did his strength, and the wrath of the heavens waited behind his eyes. He learned of his birth, of his devoured siblings, of the stone that Cronus had swallowed in his place, and he vowed in the cold of night and in the echoing chambers of the cave that he would not let the same fate fall upon him. The world outside turned, unaware that in a hidden grotto, vengeance was ripening like fruit on the vine. The age of Titans endured, but in the roots of the mountain, a child of thunder listened to the earth and prepared. The same prophecy that had felled Uranus now beat like a second heart beneath the soil. For in the world of gods, no feast lasts forever, no crown sits easy, and no power is ever truly safe from the child born in shadow, with a name whispered only by mothers and nymphs. For a time, the rule of Cronus was hailed across the breadth of the earth as a golden age, not for its justice nor its mercy, but for its simplicity. There was order, there was stability. The Titans held sway over the known world, their strength unmatched, and their names etched like iron into the bones of the mountains and the furthest stretch of ocean. Mortals, newly awakened from the soil and breath of Gaia, lived in quiet harmony, untouched by the horrors of war or the endless tumults of ambition that would later scar the ages. They did not grow old. They did not suffer the pain of famine or disease. They lived in communion with the earth, and the earth, still young and strong, fed them without complaint. This age bore no kings among men, no cities fortified by blood, no altars scorched with sacrifice. The gods walked distant and proud, and the world turned beneath their shadow, undisturbed by revolt or upheaval. And at the center of it all stood Cronus, sharp-eyed and silent, the sickle that had won him the heavens no longer in his hand, but buried deep, hidden where no one could claim it. Or so he hoped. Cronus ruled not through cruelty, but through fear. Not the fear of those he governed, for men in that age did not yet name their gods with terror. No, it was his own fear that governed all things. The prophecy of Uranus hung over him like a sword balanced on a fraying cord, poised to fall with the weight of a whisper. The voice of his father still echoed in the corners of Cronus's mind, soft as smoke and sharp as broken stone, warning that his own son would rise against him. And Cronus, for all his strength, had learned well what happens to those who ignore prophecy. He had been the prophecy once. He had drawn the blade. He knew its power. And so he chose not to wait for the knife to find his throat. He chose to smother the future before it could open its eyes. When Rhea, his sister and queen, bore him their first child, a daughter wrapped in flame and warmth, Cronus took her from Rhea's arms before the mother could even name her. The child was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the still fire at the center of all homes. Cronus looked into the infant's eyes, eyes that carried no threat, no rebellion, only innocence and a flickering flame, and he opened his jaws and swallowed her whole. There was no blood, no breaking of bone, no scream. She passed from the world like a dream dissolving at dawn, her divine body vanishing into the cavern of his belly, imprisoned but undestroyed. The act was not driven by hatred. It was sacrifice offered to fear. When Rhea bore their second, Demeter, goddess of the harvest and the waiting field, Cronus did the same. Then Hera, the storm-eyed future queen, proud even in infancy. Then Hades, whose dark gaze was already fixed on the caverns below. Then Poseidon, wreathed in salt and breath of sea, his cries echoing like waves against the shore. Each was taken, each was swallowed. Each was bound in silence within their father's body. And Rhea, who had once walked like a queen through the halls of Olympus, grew thin with grief and heavy with wrath. Her arms, again and again emptied of her children, trembled with a fury she did not speak aloud, but the ache in her womb did not fade. The cycle continued, and in the quiet, she turned not to her husband, not to her sisters, but to Gaia, the eternal, the wise, who knew well the ache of betrayal and the bitter taste of vengeance. Gaia, who had once plotted the fall of Uranus, listened once more. And together, they crafted a plan not of war or confrontation, but of quiet defiance, the kind that grows in the spaces between heartbeat and breath. When Rhea bore her sixth child, she did not announce it. She did not weep aloud. She slipped away to the island of Crete, to a cave beneath Mount Ida, where the air was thick with the scent of cedar and goat milk, and the sky seemed too distant to hear a cry. There, in secrecy and sorrow, she gave birth to Zeus. The boy was strong from the first breath, his lungs full of thunder, and his fingers curled like they were already reaching for a crown. Rhea kissed his brow and swore no Titan's jaws would ever close around him. When she returned to Cronus, she carried not her son, but a swaddled stone. It was wrapped in soft linen and smeared with the scent of afterbirth. Cronus, blinded by habit and dread, did not question. He took the bundle and swallowed it whole. The deception worked. Zeus was spared. And high in the mountains, surrounded by loyal nymphs and shielded by the clanging dance of the Curetes, the infant god was fed with the milk of Amalthea and lulled to sleep by lullabies older than language. The years passed, and the boy grew. He grew in strength, in cunning, and in purpose. He knew his siblings were not dead, but bound in the belly of the tyrant. He knew his father's time was borrowed, a fire fed only by the kindling of fear. And he knew, as all sons must one day know, that the world his father had built was not one he would inherit. It was one he would have to tear down, ere. But not yet. The golden age continued, its days numbered in secret, its sunsets beautiful and doomed. The Titans ruled still, but the wind had changed. Somewhere far from the throne, a storm was learning to speak. When Zeus came of age, the world had not yet seen him. He had grown in secret, cradled by the earth, hardened by solitude, and raised among ancient things that whispered to him of duty and vengeance. The Cretan cave in which he had been hidden still echoed with the clang of the Curetes' weapons, a dance of defiance that masked his infancy, and now, in his maturity, stirred his blood like the sound of distant war drums. He had learned from Gaia that he was not alone in the world, not truly, for within the gut of Cronus still lived his siblings, swallowed yet undigested, immortal and imprisoned, flickering like smothered stars. Hestia, the gentle flame, Demeter, the patient harvest, Hera, fierce with pride, Hades brooding in the dark, Poseidon, restless like the tide. They lived, and Zeus felt them in his dreams, their essence calling to him like voices from beneath the sea. He had not known them, not truly, but he bore their memory in his marrow, and he knew that his father's reign was a sickness upon the world, a brittle shell of power built atop fear and sealed with silence. It was Gaia who first brought him to Metis, the wise Titaness, who understood the tides of prophecy and the craft of cunning. Together, Zeus and Metis plotted the undoing of Cronus, not with swords nor storms, but with a drink laced with ancient magic, a draught brewed from the roots of the earth and the bile of serpents, bitter and thick with the power of reversal. Zeus did not come in wrath. He came as a servant, veiled in humility, bearing the poisoned drink in a goblet of carved stone. Cronus, as proud as he was weary, never suspected. He drank, and the world changed. First came the stone, cold and round, wrapped still in the cloth Rhea had once pressed into his hands. It tumbled from his throat and struck the earth with the weight of prophecy fulfilled. Then came the gods. One by one, his children returned to the world, full-formed and radiant, as if no time had passed, as if they had merely been dreaming. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. They emerged not as infants, but as immortals forged in the crucible of suffering, their eyes lit with the fire of purpose. They stood beside Zeus, not as subjects, but as equals. The 6 children of Cronus, now reunited, did not need to speak their oath aloud. It hung between them, unspoken but ironclad. They would not be devoured again. They would rise. They would make war. And so began the Titanomachy, the war that tore the heavens and split the earth, a conflict that raged for 10 years and shook the very bones of the world. On one side stood the old gods, the Titans, led by Cronus and bolstered by the might of his brothers and sisters, towering beings of vast power, each etched with the memory of the first age. On the other side stood the younger gods, the Olympians, raw and burning with purpose, wielding the fury of youth and the justice of rebellion. The war was not a single battle, not a clash of arms that ended with a victor crowned. It was a storm that lasted a decade, a siege against time itself. Mountains were thrown like javelins. Rivers ran red not with blood, but with the force of the divine. Day and night lost meaning as the heavens burned and the earth cracked beneath the weight of struggle. At first, the Titans held the upper hand. Cronus fought with a desperation born of inevitability, striking with all the terror of one who knows his throne cannot last, but refuses to fall without fire. The younger gods, though mighty, could not overcome the entrenched power of the Titans alone. But Gaia, ever watchful, whispered again to Zeus, reminding him of the allies his father had once buried. Deep in Tartarus, in chains of agony, still lay the 100-handed ones, Briareus, Cottus, and Gyges, and the Cyclopes, children of Gaia and Uranus, born before time and stronger than mountains. Zeus descended into the pit, the realm of shadow and sorrow, where even the light of the gods could barely cling to the walls. There he found them, bound in suffering, their 100 hands limp, their 100 mouths silenced. He broke their chains. He spoke to them, not as a master, but as a brother. In return, they gave him gifts. The Cyclopes, once scorned, forged weapons to match the fury of the sky. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, a spear of lightning that split the heavens with a single cry. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, a weapon that could stir the oceans and shatter the land. For Hades, they gave the helm of darkness, a crown of invisibility that cloaked its wearer from sight and spirit alike. Armed and emboldened, the Olympians rose anew, not as rebels, but as gods of destiny. The final days of the war were apocalyptic. Briareus and his brothers hurled boulders like hail. Zeus rained thunder upon the peaks of Thessaly. Poseidon shook the sea until islands cracked in two. Hades, unseen, slipped through the ranks of Titans, sowing confusion and fear. At last, Cronus fell, not in a blaze of glory, but in exhaustion, overcome not only by the might of his children, but by the prophecy he had tried to defy. The Titans were defeated, bound in chains of unbreakable bronze and hurled into Tartarus, deeper than dreams, beneath even the roots of the earth. There, guarded by the 100-handed ones, they would remain, howling in silence, memories of a power that could not outlast time. Zeus stood over the battlefield, not as a child of prophecy, but as a king. The sky cleared. The war was over. The age of the Titans had ended. A new age was about to begin. But peace in the world of gods is always fleeting. And the throne, once won, is never safe. The war had ended, or so the gods believed. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, bound beneath the roots of the world, and the sky, once split with thunder and the shouts of battle, had gone still. Zeus had claimed the throne, not with ceremony, but with the simple fact of victory. The halls of Olympus, newly risen atop the mountain that pierced the heavens, began to echo with the footsteps of the new gods. Their voices were loud with triumph, and their laughter rolled like wine through the stone corridors. But far beneath their feet, deeper than the darkness of Hades, the earth remembered its wounds. The blood of Uranus still pulsed in its buried veins, and Gaia, ancient and enduring, stirred in fury. She had helped the Olympians in their war, but her allegiance had never belonged to Zeus. Her loyalty was to balance, to vengeance, and to the old order that had been cast down. The fall of Cronus had not healed the pain of Uranus. It had only shifted the weight of power from one hand to another. The throne of the sky had changed owners, but its arrogance had remained, and Gaia, who had seen 2 generations of kings rise and fall, was not yet done with prophecy. In the bowels of the world, Gaia called upon Tartarus himself, that shadowed abyss which swallowed light and mocked the notion of form. Together they created a final son, born not to rule, but to destroy. His name was Typhon, and no god had ever looked upon anything so vast or so terrible. His body was greater than mountains, his form shifting like smoke and shadow, and his head reached the stars. Serpents writhed from his thighs, and his arms stretched from the eastern edge of the world to the farthest west. His voice was the shriek of 1,000 beasts, and his eyes burned with fire. When he breathed, it scorched the sky. When he roared, even the dead stirred in their tombs. He was the last born of the earth, the storm that would end all thrones. Not even the Titans in their prime had borne such monstrous power. Typhon rose from the depths like a nightmare made flesh. The sea recoiled at his coming. The mountains bent like reeds. As he approached Olympus, the sky darkened with unnatural clouds, and thunder cracked the heavens, not from Zeus's hand, but from the fury of something older and angrier than the gods had ever known. The Olympians saw him and despaired. They had tasted war, but they had never seen this. Many fled. Apollo, swift as ever, vanished to the west. Hermes slipped into shadow. Ares, god of war, trembled and fled to distant lands. Only a few remained. Athena stood firm, spear in hand, her face cold as marble. And Zeus, whose hand still bore the thunderbolt, refused to abandon his throne. Zeus faced Typhon alone. The battle was not a single duel, not a strike and a counter. It was a cataclysm, a war of elements, a struggle that echoed through every realm of existence. Typhon hurled mountains like stones. He tore up rivers and flung them skyward. His serpents lashed the stars. Zeus met him with storm. Lightning burst from his palm like spears of flame. Thunder shattered the air. The winds obeyed his command, howling with fury, and the rain fell in sheets that drowned valleys. They fought across the heavens, across the earth, even into the sea, their clash reshaping the world with every blow. Zeus struck Typhon down upon Mount Haemus, and the blood of the monster stained its slopes forever. But Typhon did not die. He rose again, and in a moment of weakness, he overcame the king of the gods. With his monstrous limbs, he tore the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, ripping from him the very strength that made him sovereign. Crippled and bound, Zeus was carried by Typhon to a distant cave in Cilicia, hidden among the black cliffs and jagged rocks, where he was imprisoned, helpless and mocked. But gods are not so easily slain. The tale of Zeus's captivity passed into the hands of Hermes and Pan, who together crept into the cave, disguised by shadow and guile. They tricked the monstrous guardian and stole back the sinews, fleeing with the speed of wind and goatfoot. When they returned the stolen strength to Zeus, the skies once again shivered with his fury. No longer bound, no longer silent, he rose in wrath. He summoned every storm. The heavens turned black, the stars were veiled, and the earth itself held its breath. The final clash came not in the sky but upon the earth, where Zeus hurled the full might of his thunderbolt into Typhon's heart. The blow shook the world. Typhon screamed, his voice a chorus of agony that shattered the mountains and drove beasts mad. Cracked and broken he staggered, and Zeus cast him down at last. He fell into the bowels of the earth, where even Gaia could not reach him. There he was entombed, crushed beneath Mount Etna in Sicily, his body chained in molten stone, his breath venting as smoke, his limbs writhing in futile rage. The volcano that bears his prison still rumbles with his fury, still smokes with his breath. It is said that when Etna erupts, it is Typhon stirring in his chains, dreaming of vengeance and storm. With the monster defeated, Zeus returned to Olympus, not only as king, but as savior. He had faced the final horror, the last child of Earth's wrath, and he had endured. The other gods, who had fled or faltered, returned to his court in silence. They bent their knees and accepted the new order, not out of love, but out of awe. Olympus belonged to Zeus now, not by right, but by conquest. And though the throne was his, he knew what Gaia had always known. The world remembers. The world does not forgive. And even the greatest gods must always keep one eye on the deep places beneath their feet, where monsters dream of fire and the future waits in silence. The sky was quiet again. The air, once thick with the smoke of burning mountains and the scent of scorched divine blood, grew still. The echoes of Typhon's defeat faded into memory, but their weight lingered in the bones of the gods. Zeus, who had wrestled with the storm and stood bloodied before the jaws of annihilation, returned to Olympus changed. He had taken the throne by victory, by cunning, by prophecy fulfilled, and now, after facing the wrath of the earth herself, he claimed it with finality. There would be no more monsters. There would be no more wars among the gods. Not if he could help it. But Zeus, for all his thunder and might, was not a fool. He knew that rule was never secure unless it was shared in balance. Even the sky cannot exist without the pull of the sea or the hush of the underworld. And so, with the blood of the old age still wet upon the soil, the three sons of Cronus gathered, and they cast lots to divide the dominion of all existence. They did not argue. They did not plead. They left their fates to chance, as was the custom of gods. Each drew from the urn a token shaped by destiny. To Zeus fell the sky, the heavens above, the clouds and winds, and the throne of Olympus itself. To Poseidon came the sea, the fathomless deep, and every wave that ever rolled against a shore. And to Hades, eldest and most grim, fell the underworld, the shadowed land where the dead drift in silence and memory. The earth itself, the realm of mortals and mountains and forests, was left unclaimed, shared equally among them, though each would touch it in their own way. It was said that the lot fell fairly, though some whispered that Zeus had bent fate with a quiet hand. But none questioned it aloud. The balance had been struck, and the world, for the first time, knew order. Zeus ascended to his throne atop Olympus, a seat he carved from the bones of the storm, ringed in cloud and guarded by law. Around him gathered the new pantheon, gods born from the swallowed and returned children of Cronus, and others born of the earth and sea in quieter days. There was Hera, his sister, and now his queen, proud and watchful, her eyes always searching for betrayal behind the veil of ceremony. There was Demeter, who brought the first wheat from her fingers and gave it to mortals in secret. Hestia, who rekindled every hearth in every home. Poseidon, who stirred the sea into motion and built palaces beneath the waves from coral and stone. Hades, who descended into the deep places of the world and built a realm for the dead, cold and ordered, lit only by the flickering memory of life. And Zeus, who reigned not as a tyrant, but as the keeper of balance, the wielder of justice, the god of storm and sky, and the hidden fates that bind gods and men alike. But rule, once won, must be maintained. Zeus set about building not only a court, but a structure of divine law. He declared oaths sacred, punishable by death or worse. He appointed the fates to spin the threads of all mortal and immortal lives, their scissors sharp and unerring. He set the Erinyes, the Furies, to haunt those who spilled kindred blood. He demanded reverence and sacrifice, not as tribute, but as acknowledgement of order. And when his cousin Prometheus, son of Iapetus and brother to Epimetheus, dared to defy him by siding with the mortals and stealing fire from the gods to warm their trembling fingers, Zeus did not hesitate. Prometheus, whose foresight was said to rival the oracles, was chained to a mountain at the edge of the world. Each day, an eagle descended upon him and tore out his liver. Each night, it grew back, immortal suffering for immortal crime. Justice, as Zeus defined it. But justice in the hands of a god is never without spectacle. To punish mankind for the theft of fire, Zeus commissioned the gods to shape a new creature, one more dangerous than any monster of the past. From clay, Hephaestus molded her. From beauty, Aphrodite blessed her. From charm and deceit, Hermes and Apollo lent their gifts. Her name was Pandora, and she was sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus's foolhardy brother, who accepted her despite all warnings. With her came a jar, sealed tight. She opened it, as she was meant to do, and from it spilled every sorrow the world had never known. Disease, famine, grief, betrayal, war. Only hope remained inside, clinging to the lid as the last whisper in the dark. Thus the age of mortals truly began, not in innocence, but in knowledge, in struggle, and in fear. Still, Zeus ruled. He looked down from Olympus and watched the slow march of mankind, their prayers rising like smoke, their temples built in stone and salt and supplication. He listened to the songs they sang in his name and in the names of his kin. He punished the arrogant, rewarded the pious, and moved the world as a man might shift the coals in a brazier, never letting the fire die. The earth was no longer wild. It had been shaped, defined, and divided. But beneath its surface, Gaia still slept, and the Titans still stirred in their prisons, and the old truths still whispered through the roots of trees and the lips of dying seers. The war had ended. The throne was secured. But Olympus was not invulnerable. No kingdom is. And the age of Zeus, though just begun, would not be without its trials. High upon Mount Olympus, where no mortal foot could tread, and no storm could reach unless summoned by divine will. The great halls of the gods rose from cloud and stone. Marble columns glistened in the light of dawn, and silver fires burned eternally along corridors that stretched wider than valleys. It was here that Zeus, king of the gods, reigned over heaven and earth. His seat was carved from the sky itself, cloaked in thunderclouds and veined with lightning. He held the Aegis, a terrible shield fringed with serpents and crowned with the head of the Gorgon. His voice summoned storms. His will was law. And beside him, cloaked not in thunder but in ice, stood Hera, his sister and queen, the goddess of marriage, sovereignty, and divine vengeance. Where Zeus's rule was loud and crackling, like the sky in battle, Hera's dominion was silent and enduring, like a crown passed from one ruler to another through blood and time. Their union was not born of love, though there was passion, and not born of peace, though it had endured longer than any mortal kingdom. It was forged in power, in the joining of two great lineages, and bound by the old laws that ruled the divine long before men named them. Hera had been courted by Zeus with all the cunning he could conjure, for she did not fall easily, nor did she offer her hand lightly. Zeus came to her cloaked in mist, in the form of a trembling bird, cold and small, seeking shelter in her lap. She cradled the creature, unknowing. And when her guard had dropped, Zeus revealed himself and claimed her with the strength of a storm. She wept, not with sorrow, but with fury, and vowed she would marry him, if only to bind the offense in the chains of law. And so she became his wife, not by consent freely given, but by oath sealed in divine tradition. From that day forward, Hera sat beside Zeus on Olympus, proud and bright-eyed, but never tamed. Theirs was a marriage of thrones, not hearts. Zeus, for all his grandeur, was a god of appetites. He desired beauty and cleverness, song and flesh, and he pursued his hungers wherever they led him. Nymphs, goddesses, mortal queens, and unsuspecting maidens, all were drawn into his orbit, sometimes by charm, often by deceit. He changed shape to reach them. A swan, a bull, a shower of gold, he bent the laws of form and time to satisfy his whims, and Hera, bound by her station, watched. She knew. She always knew. The Queen of Heaven was no fool. Her silence was never ignorance. It was patience turned to wrath. Hera's vengeance was not swift. It was not like Zeus's thunderbolts, loud and fleeting. Hers was slow and precise. She did not strike Zeus. She struck what he loved. His mistresses, who bore the children of fate and tragedy. His sons and daughters, half divine, doomed from birth to carry the burden of their father's sins. Io turned into a heifer and chased across the world by a biting gadfly. Semele, burned to ash by Zeus's divine form, her unborn child ripped from her body and sewn into Zeus's own thigh. Leto, exiled and hunted while pregnant with twins. Alcmen, who bore Heracles and was hounded by Hera's hatred even before the child drew his first breath. Hera's punishments were cruel, but they were always deliberate. She did not rage blindly. She orchestrated the ruin of those who defied her dignity. There was one time, it is said, when Hera could bear no more. The weight of humiliation, of whispered jests in Olympus's golden halls, of the quiet sympathy in Athena's eyes, and the mocking laughter of Aphrodite, drove her to action. She gathered the other gods, Poseidon with his trident clenched in scorn, Athena with her cold logic, Apollo with his sun-drenched pride. And together they plotted against Zeus. While the king of the gods slept, They crept into his chamber and wrapped him in chains forged by Hephaestus himself. They bound him in silence, thinking to force a new order upon Olympus. But their rebellion failed, as rebellions often do when power is underestimated. Thetis, the silver-footed sea nymph, summoned Briareus, the 100-handed one, who came roaring up from the depths and broke the chains with ease. Zeus awoke, and in his fury seized Hera. He hung her from the sky by golden fetters, her arms stretched wide, anvils tied to her ankles. She wept, but not for mercy. She wept because he had made her spectacle, because in his wrath he had tried to humiliate her before the world. She did not forget. In time, he released her. There was no apology. There was no reconciliation, only an unspoken truce between sovereigns who knew that their rule depended on standing side by side, whether in unity or in silence. Hera returned to her throne and resumed her place as queen, more watchful than ever. She would never forgive the slights. She would never forget the pain, but she would wear her crown, and she would rule with grace and terror. For Olympus was not merely Zeus's realm, it was hers as well, shaped by her silence, her vengeance, and her unwavering resolve. Together, Zeus and Hera governed the heavens. Their children were few, but powerful. Ares, god of war, violent and impetuous. Hebe, goddess of youth and cupbearer to the gods. Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth. Hephaestus, who was cast from Olympus for his ugliness, or for daring to defend his mother, depending on which tale one believes. Their house was a battlefield and a court, a place of feast and judgment, of grudges and alliances. The royal family of Olympus was no different than the dynasties of mortal kings, proud, fractured, bound by blood and burden. And at its heart sat Zeus and Hera, eternal and embattled, locked in a marriage that had outlasted empires and would outlast them still. Not a love story, but a reign. Not a union, but a throne shared between two gods too proud to yield. Among the many paradoxes that formed the storm-crowned reign of Zeus, none were more wondrous nor more terrifying than the strange arrival of his children. They were not born as mortal children are born, with pain and blood and the soft wailing of new life. No, the offspring of Zeus entered the world like omens, sudden and radiant and strange, as if the very fabric of existence could not contain them for long. Their births were tangled in prophecy, in vengeance, in deceit and pride, and none more so than that of Athena, the bright-eyed goddess of wisdom, of war and reason, of strategy, and the cities of men. Her coming was not foretold by stars, nor sung by nymphs, but whispered in fear by the earth itself. For Zeus had taken Metis, the cleverest of the Titanesses, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, whose mind was said to be as deep as the sea and as subtle as mist. She was not seduced with force or fire. Zeus pursued her with patience, cloaking himself in flattery and argument, drawing her into his embrace, not out of passion, but because the world had grown too unstable for a woman like her to walk free. Yet even in victory, he feared her. For Gaia and Uranus had warned him that Metis would bear him 2 children. The first, a daughter, wiser than her mother. The second, a son, who would be mightier than his father and cast him down as Zeus had cast down Cronus, and Cronus had struck down Uranus before him. Zeus, who had once freed the world from the tyranny of his sire, now trembled at the thought of his own undoing. And so, when Metis was with child, he acted. He summoned her with sweet words and coaxed her to his side. Then, without warning or hesitation, he opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. The gods who witnessed it said nothing. The air stood still. Metis vanished into his body, and with her went the child she carried. But Metis was not like other beings. She did not die. She lived within Zeus, her voice curling around his bones, her knowledge spreading through his limbs like wine through a golden cup. She nested in his mind, whispering, growing, watching. And in time, the child she bore began to press against the boundaries of her prison, not with fists, but with thought, with reason, with power that no father could contain. Zeus began to suffer. At first, it was a stiffness in the temples, then a pounding that shook his very vision. No healing nor incantation soothed him. No god could ease his pain. Finally, in desperation, he called upon Hephaestus, the smith of Olympus, the god of flame and craft and forge. In some tellings it was Prometheus, in others Hermes or Pallas. But the most enduring tale names Hephaestus, grim and resolute, bearing a bronze axe forged in the depths of the earth. At Zeus's command, the smith lifted his blade and split the Sky King's forehead with a single stroke, and from the crack, not in blood, but in brilliance, emerged Athena. She came forth fully grown, armored in gold and gleaming bronze, her shield polished to mirror the stars, her spear taller than a man's height, her eyes sharp as tempered steel. She did not cry out. She shouted a war cry so pure and so strong that the heavens trembled and Olympus itself shook. The gods drew back in awe. No one had ever seen such a birth. No one had ever seen a goddess so composed, so cold, so complete. She was not a child. She was a force. And from that moment, she became the favored daughter of Zeus, not merely a reflection of his will, but its sharpening. He gave her the aegis to wear. He trusted her counsel before all others. She was wisdom and strategy, and unlike her father, she did not bend easily to impulse or wrath. She was war, but not fury. She was justice, but not mercy. The olive tree and the spear, the owl and the storm. Yet not all his children emerged so favored. For another child, born under darker skies and crueler arrangements, found only rejection. Hephaestus, god of fire and forge, lame from birth, was said to have been born of Hera alone. In her fury over Zeus birthing Athena without her, Hera resolved to bear a child without his seed. But when she saw the boy, twisted in leg and limb, she recoiled. Whether she cast him from Olympus out of disgust or Zeus himself flung the child in anger during a quarrel, none now say for certain. But Hephaestus fell. He tumbled from the golden halls for an entire day and night, crashing into the sea, where Thetis and Eurynome, two kind-hearted sea goddesses, pulled him from the waves and hid him in a cave. There he grew not in bitterness, but in brilliance. Hephaestus built wonders, golden thrones that moved, automatons that walked, jewelry that shimmered like the sun. He shaped beauty from flame, and in time he returned. He sent Hera a gift, a throne more splendid than any in Olympus, adorned with pearls and silver, and gears so fine they could not be seen. But when she sat, the throne bound her fast. She could not rise, could not move. The gods begged Hephaestus to release her, but he refused. "I have no mother," he said. Only after Dionysus found him and gave him wine, singing him into joy and stupor, did Hephaestus relent. He came back to Olympus riding a mule, crowned in ivy, and freed Hera. From then on, he claimed his place as the smith of the gods, and they could not do without him. Yet his bitterness remained. His heart, forged in fire, was not immune to pain. When he was wedded to Aphrodite, the most beautiful of all goddesses, it was not love, but order that arranged the match. And she betrayed him. She took Ares into her bed, and when Hephaestus learned of it, he crafted a net so fine it could not be seen, and he cast it over their entwined bodies, dragging them before the gods to shame them in the eyes of Olympus. The gods laughed, for they are cruel and capricious. But Hephaestus did not laugh. He watched, he remembered, and he returned to his forge, where he hammered his sorrow into weapons, where he poured his rage into steel. So it was that the children of Zeus did not come to him in peace. They arrived like omens, like challenges. Athena sprung from prophecy and fear. Hephaestus, cast out and risen in spite of scorn. They were not sons and daughters in the mortal sense. They were gods, fully formed and crowned with purpose. And Olympus, golden and eternal though it seemed, echoed always with the clanging of their stories. The footsteps of war, the hiss of steam, the quiet hush of wisdom, and the soft grinding of resentment beneath the marble floors. Athena, born without a mother, from the very skull of Zeus in a burst of thunder and thought, stood unlike any other goddess in Olympus. She did not crawl, she did not cry, she did not wail for milk or warmth or cradle. She sprang into the world in armor, golden and unyielding, with a spear already in her hand and reason burning behind her eyes. Her birth was not a miracle, but a warning, for no god who arrives armed and silent can be trusted to simply stand idle. The Olympians watched her with awe, for they knew this was not a goddess of soft love or idle beauty. This was a goddess of judgment and will, of strategy, of city walls, of laws written in flame. In the long halls of Olympus, where jealousy and lust often stirred more quickly than wisdom, she moved with purpose. Where other gods shouted or laughed or wept, Athena merely looked. She spoke seldom, but when she did, her words cleaved through silence like a blade through silk. Unlike Ares, who relished the frenzy of blood and chaos, Athena represented the colder side of war, the kind that draws maps and lays traps, the kind that builds siege towers and calculates the movement of men like pieces on a painted board. Hers was the realm of generals, not berserkers. When men prayed to her before battle, they prayed not for fury, but for clarity. They asked for strength in the shield wall, for unbroken lines, for the wisdom to know when to strike and when to wait. She answered those who showed discipline and courage. She did not favor cowards, nor did she indulge recklessness. And when she walked upon the battlefield, and there were times she did, she moved like a shadow of bronze and wind, guiding the brave, toppling the foolish, her shield alight with the Gorgon's head, and her feet never touching blood. Her patronage extended far beyond war. Athena was a goddess of cities, not in name only, but in soul. She brought order to the chaos of wandering tribes. She gave mortals the first glimmer of what it meant to live not as beasts, but as citizens. Architecture, shipbuilding, the loom, the plough, all these, the ancients believed, came from her. She taught crafts and strategy, the weaving of cloth and the weaving of law. Where she walked, men began to shape stone into temples, to raise statues not in fear, but in admiration. And among all the cities, one became her own. When Cecrops, the first king of a newly risen city on the rocky promontory of Attica, prepared to offer his city to a god, both Poseidon and Athena appeared, each laying claim to the people. Poseidon, proud and tempestuous, struck the earth with his trident, and from the rock sprang a fountain of salt water, or in some versions, a magnificent warhorse, swift, strong, untamable. But Athena planted an olive tree, its roots deep and its leaves shimmering silver in the breeze. The people saw the gifts and chose the olive, for it gave wood, food, oil, and peace. And so the city was named for her, Athens. She guarded it always, not with fire, but with wisdom and with an eye that missed nothing. In times of peril, her owl flew across its rooftops. In times of glory, her statues towered above its walls. Even as wars came and kings fell, Athens remained hers. Yet like all the gods, Athena was not without pride. She did not suffer rivals, especially not among mortals who dared to mirror her brilliance. There was a girl once, a Lydian named Arachne, whose skill in weaving was so fine that no pattern could outmatch it. No thread ever broke beneath her fingers. When her neighbors whispered that perhaps Athena herself had taught her, Arachne scoffed. She claimed the goddess had nothing to do with her art, that her skill was her own. When Athena heard this, she came down not in storm or fury, but in disguise, an old woman with tired eyes, and warned Arachne to humble herself. But Arachne refused. She challenged the goddess to a contest. Athena dropped her disguise, and they both wove. The goddess wove the glory of Olympus, the justice of the gods, the foolishness of those who dared defy them. Arachne, with her mortal hands, wove the sins of the gods. Zeus disguised as a swan, a bull, a shower of gold, taking mortal women by guile and force. When they finished, both tapestries were perfect. But it was the truth in Arachne's work that stung deepest. And Athena, humiliated by mortal craft and mortal courage, struck the loom and tore the threads. Arachne, broken with shame and terror, tried to take her own life. But Athena stopped her and transformed her instead into a spider, cursed to weave forever in silence, her skill preserved, but her form twisted. This was not mercy, this was judgment. She was not a goddess of love, nor of forgiveness. Unlike Aphrodite, she did not flirt. Unlike Hera, she did not rage in jealousy. Athena remained forever virgin, not from chastity, but from control. No man, no god, no titan had ever laid claim to her. Even Hephaestus, when he tried to force himself upon her in a moment of madness, failed. His seed spilled upon the earth, and from it came Erichthonius, a serpent-born king of Athens, whom Athena took and raised in secret. She had no children of her own, for she was mother to wisdom itself, and wisdom has no need of lineage. She stood at her father's side during the great councils. She guided Perseus to slay the Gorgon, lending him her shield. She steered Odysseus home when Poseidon tried to drown him. She stood by Heracles and gave him strength to bear his labors. She was never warm. She was never cruel. She was something deeper, the chill of reason, the silence of judgment, the resolve of law. On Olympus, Athena's halls were quiet. No laughter rang there. No lovers waited behind her doors. But when the gods argued, when Zeus faltered, when the world teetered on the edge of chaos, it was Athena who spoke, and all listened. Even Ares, the blood-drunk god of war, learned to still his hand when she stepped forth with her spear and her eyes like hammered iron. For there was no hiding from Athena, no refuge from her sight. She saw not only what was, but what must be. And when she moved, the world moved with her. Where Athena walked in silence and light, her spear sharp with thought and lore, Ares thundered across the battlefield in a frenzy of blood and flame. He was not strategy, he was not wisdom, he was war in its rawest and most brutal form. The shriek of a dying horse, the crack of bone beneath iron, the sound of fire crackling through a broken palisade. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, was born of 2 thrones, and yet belonged to none. From the moment he came into the world, clad not in armor, but in violence, the gods looked upon him with unease. Even his father, king of the skies, harbored little love for the child. For Ares did not obey, did not bargain, did not calculate. He lived for conflict, and conflict followed him like a loyal dog. Unlike Athena, whose clarity made men better, Ares sowed chaos. He strode into battle not to guide mortals, but to revel in their madness. Where he passed, men forgot formation. Brothers turned against brothers. Wounds festered. Shields broke. Mercy withered. He did not reward honor. He did not punish cowardice. To Ares, all that mattered was the clash, the scream, the press of blade to flesh. His armor was always stained, his voice always raised. His chariot, drawn by steeds foaming red at the mouth, bore him into every war with a grin upon his lips and his eyes alight with lust for ruin. He did not march alone. Beside him ran his children. Phobos, the god of fear, who whispered panic into the hearts of armies, and Deimos, the god of terror, who made even brave men forget their names. With them came Enyo, goddess of battle herself, clad in crimson and flame, her hands always wet with gore. Wherever Ares rode, they followed, a family of shadows cast long over the earth, turning every campaign into carnage. The Greeks feared him more than they honored him. They built him few temples, offered him few songs. For to worship Ares was not to seek protection. It was to beg that he pass by. And yet, for all his brutality, Ares was not a simple god. He could love, though his love was poisonous. He could be wounded, though his wounds were rare. He could rage, not from pride, but from humiliation. And it was in matters of the heart that he was most often brought low. For despite his strength and splendor, Ares was not the most beautiful of the gods. That title belonged to Aphrodite, goddess of love and pleasure, born from the sea foam and the severed parts of Uranus. She was golden, radiant, and cold as polished marble. And Ares loved her, not with the desperate yearning of mortals, but with a hunger that could not be satisfied. She was the wife of Hephaestus, the smith, the crippled one, cast from Olympus by his own mother and dragged back only for his unmatched talent. It was a marriage of function, not desire. Aphrodite turned to Ares, and together they lay in secret, tangled in sheets of fire and silk, their bodies entwined in pleasure and peril. But the gods see all things, and Hephaestus, patient and cunning, crafted a net so fine that no eye could catch it and no hand could break it. He cast it upon them while they lay in their embrace, and he summoned the gods to witness their shame. Bound and exposed, Ares and Aphrodite became a tale told in laughter and warning. The gods jeered. Poseidon alone offered to pay the fine that would free them. Hephaestus accepted. Ares fled Olympus in disgrace. But the sting of humiliation did not still his blood. He returned to war. He hurled himself into battles with greater fury, as if each slain warrior might erase the memory of his shame. And yet the world remembered. The poets sang of Ares not as a hero, but as a force. During the Trojan War, he took the side of the Trojans, drawn by blood and beauty. His own son Ascalaphus fought and died among the Greeks. Ares wept, it is said. But grief did not temper him. He stormed the battlefield, only to be struck down by Diomedes, a mortal favored by Athena. With the aid of the goddess, Diomedes wounded Ares with a spear, and the god cried out in agony so great that the battlefield trembled. He fled to Olympus, clutching his wound, and complained to Zeus like a wounded child. But Zeus, weary of Ares and his endless thirst for strife, offered no comfort. He called him the most hateful of all his children. Still, Ares endured, for war never ends. Cities fall, kings rise, the banners change, but Ares remains. In every scream of rage, in every knife turned in the dark, in every war camp where fire smokes and soldiers sharpen blades with shaking hands, Ares is there, not noble, not wise, but necessary. For mankind has never known peace for long, and so long as they make war, the god of bloodshed will ride. Perhaps he is hated, perhaps he is cursed, but even the gods cannot turn away from war. And Ares, clad in scarlet and iron, marches ever onward, crowned not in laurels, but in the silence that follows slaughter. In the time when Zeus reigned unchallenged from his golden throne, and Olympus hummed with the whispers of fate and ambition, there came into the world a pair of twins who would shape the rhythm of gods and men alike. They were born not in the high halls of cloud and marble, but far away, on the hidden island of Delos, where the sea winds whispered through groves of laurel, and the ground trembled with the breath of prophecy. Their mother was Leto, daughter of the Titans Coeus and Phoebe, and once a companion of Zeus in the earliest days of his power. But her womb, heavy with the gods' children, became the subject of divine scorn and pursuit. Hera, ever jealous and watchful, sent her wrath across the earth. She forbade any land under the light of the sun to shelter Leto. Every city, every island, every peak and valley turned her away. She wandered for days beneath the gaze of a vengeful sky, swollen with life and hunted like prey. Even the rivers ran dry where she knelt, and the beasts of the land turned from her path. And so she came to Delos, a floating island, unclaimed by earth or sea, a place that swayed upon the tides and bore no anchor to the world of mortals. There, the island opened to her. There, beneath the twilight sky, Leto gave birth. First came Artemis, silent and silver-eyed, a goddess of the hunt, of wild places and moonlight. Then came Apollo, and with his arrival came the cry of prophecy, loud and piercing. The sun shone brighter that day, the waves calmed, and the island, long unmoored, set its roots into the sea. Even the fates paused to listen as the child cried out, for they knew that this god, though newborn, would not be content to dwell in shadow or silence. He would seek dominion. He would speak with the voice of truth and flame. Apollo grew swiftly, as gods often do, not in years, but in presence. He took no time to find his place in the cosmos. From the moment he first held the bow in his hand, he was peerless. He could strike a sparrow in flight from the sky, or split a pine tree from a mile away. But his bow was not only a weapon of death, it was a tool of justice. And when he learned of Python, the monstrous serpent who guarded the ancient sanctuary of Gaia at Delphi, he knew what he must do. Python, born of the earth, was not merely a beast. He was old magic, chthonic, and coiled with ancient knowledge. But he had also been Hera's wrath, sent to torment Leto as she fled. Apollo, though young, bore no patience for insult. With arrows of gold and intent as bright as the rising dawn, he descended upon Delphi and slew the serpent. The blood stained the stones for 7 days. The earth mourned, but Apollo built his temple upon that very place, claiming it not in conquest, but in transformation. Thereafter, Delphi became his seat, his mouthpiece, his beating heart. The oracle rose from the steaming fissures of the mountain, a woman touched by the god's breath, writhing with visions that burned her voice into riddles. Kings journeyed for weeks to hear her speak. Warriors knelt, priests wept. She sat upon her tripod, her face veiled, her eyes unseeing, and from her lips came words that were not her own. Apollo did not speak through fire or fury, but through vision. His was the light that blinded gently, the truth that could not be escaped. He was the god of reason, of balance, of poetry and music and order. Where Dionysus led in madness, Apollo led in harmony. Yet Apollo was not always gentle. When slighted, he struck with precision. When Coronis, a mortal woman bearing his child, betrayed him with another, Apollo's rage was swift. He killed her not with a sword, but with knowledge. He sent his sister Artemis to do the deed, and the arrow that pierced Coronis's chest was cold and silent. But before her body was consumed by flame, Apollo tore the child from her womb. That child was Asclepius, god of healing, who would one day raise the dead and be struck down for defying the boundary between life and death. Apollo loved fiercely, but he did not forgive easily. He walked the world in many forms, as a shepherd, tending the flocks of mortal kings, as a plague-bearer, his arrows unseen and deadly, his wrath bringing death to those who defied him. As a patron of artists, he taught Orpheus to charm the stones and trees. He guided the muses, inspired Homer's verses, and played his lyre until the stars seemed to dance in their constellations. But for all his beauty, all his order, Apollo was not immune to failure. When he loved tragically. His heart sought what it could not hold. Daphne, the nymph, fled from him, calling upon her father, a river god, to save her. He turned her into a laurel tree, her skin hardening to bark even as Apollo reached to touch her. And so he wore her leaves as a crown, a symbol not of triumph but of eternal yearning. Apollo ruled the day, rode the chariot of the sun in later tellings, guiding its path across the sky. He banished darkness. He named laws. He saw all things in the light. Yet even he could not halt the turning of fate. Though gods live long, their stories stretch in shadow and light. And Apollo, for all his radiance, would one day face sorrow deeper than any wound. But that tale was yet to come. For now, he stood tall, golden, and terrible in beauty, the archer of Olympus, the seer of truths, the god who brought order to chaos and music to silence. Men raised temples in his name, kings swore oaths upon his altar. And somewhere beneath the mountain at Delphi, the old bones of Python still dreamed in the deep, waiting for the world to shift again. Before the temples were raised, before the names of gods were chiseled into marble, and before man dared to measure the world with lines and laws, there was the wilderness. It spread without boundary, thick with shadow and the scent of laurel and pine. There were no kings in those woods, no armies, no thrones, only the rustling of animals, the howl of wind, and the whisper of water beneath the moon. and it was there that Artemis ruled. Not from a palace of stone, but from the hollows of trees and the peaks of untamed mountains. She was born in silence, her birth coming first upon the island of Delos. Her mother Leto still hunted, her womb still heavy with a second child. It is said Artemis helped bring her brother into the world, serving as midwife to the god who would one day rule the sun. From that moment, she was marked not just as his twin, but as his mirror, not opposite in essence, but in nature. Where he brought order, she preserved freedom. Where he spoke in riddles and reason, she moved in instinct and silence. And while Apollo shone in the day, Artemis became the moon's quiet flame, cold, distant, and eternal. Artemis asked for her place in the cosmos early. While still a child, she approached her father Zeus with clarity unmatched by many gods, thrice her age. She did not beg. She did not smile. She asked for a bow and arrows like her brothers, a retinue of nymphs to hunt beside her, and the eternal vow of virginity, that she might never be yoked to man, never bear child, never know the bindings of hearth or marriage. She asked for the mountains and wild places to be hers, ungoverned and unspoiled. Zeus, perhaps surprised, perhaps admiring, granted all she asked without condition. From that moment, Artemis became sovereign of the untamed. She was the huntress, the protector of animals, the patron of young girls before they knew men, and the avenger of any who dared to trespass upon her sacred groves. She moved through forests clad in silver, her bow always strung, her eyes sharper than the wolves that followed her steps. She did not walk, she glided. She did not speak much. Her voice was wind through leaves, or the sharp whistle of an arrow. Mortals feared her as much as they honored her. For Artemis was not gentle. She had no patience for those who forgot their place. Niobe, queen of Thebes, once mocked Leto for bearing only 2 children, while Niobe boasted of her own brood of 14. In her arrogance, she laughed at the goddess. Artemis did not reply with words. She came down from the mountains with her brother, and together they struck the children down, Apollo taking the sons, Artemis the daughters. The earth drank deeply of royal blood that day. Niobe fled to Mount Sipylus and wept until the gods, weary of her cries, turned her into stone. But even in stone, the tears did not cease. Such was the vengeance of the twins. Artemis guarded her purity with steel. There was a man once named Actaeon, a hunter like herself, brave and boastful, who wandered into her sacred glade one dusk. He came not to harm, not to mock, but merely to drink and rest. Yet he saw what no man was meant to see, the goddess unclothed, her skin pale and unmarred, her form untouched by time or desire. She saw him. He froze, and with a glance, she transformed him into a stag. Confused, terrified, Actaeon fled into the woods, his limbs no longer his own. But his fate was already written. His own hounds, not recognizing their master, chased him down and tore him to pieces. The forest was quiet again, and the lesson was left unspoken. Yet Artemis was not cruelty itself. She was fairness, if not mercy. She healed as often as she harmed. She watched over childbirth, paradoxical though it seemed for a virgin goddess. Perhaps it was because she witnessed her own mother's pain. Perhaps it was because birth, like the moon, is a cycle of pain and light. Whatever the reason, women cried out to her in their labor, offering her honey and garlands of herbs, hoping she would soften her gaze just long enough to let the child live. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she did not. The tales of Artemis are many, and not all end in death. She protected Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, who was to be sacrificed so that Greek ships might sail to Troy. At the last moment, Artemis stole the girl away, leaving a deer in her place, and carried Iphigenia across the sea to serve as her priestess. But she also demanded that sacrifice in the first place, for Agamemnon had once slain one of her sacred stags and boasted of it. No slight was forgotten, no oath was free. The world was hers to guard, and to guard it, she became hard as the stones beneath her feet. She did not marry, she did not yield. Orion, the great hunter, walked beside her once, perhaps as companion, perhaps as beloved. Some say he tried to take her, others say he only sought her company. But in every telling, he died, whether slain by Artemis's own arrow, or by Apollo's cunning trick, or by the sting of a great scorpion sent to preserve her solitude, the result was the same. She placed him in the sky afterward, among the stars, but she did not weep. Artemis remains among the most feared and least understood of the Olympians. No temple contains her, no statue captures the chill in her gaze. She is the goddess of the in-between, not death, but what comes just before it, not love, but its untouched shadow. She rules the night, but not in dreams. She rules the forests, but not for their beauty. She exists for herself alone, and the world moves around her. She is the moon above the battlefield, the silence before the arrow flies, the shape in the woods that never quite reveals itself. And even now, in every rustling grove and flicker of silver across a black sky, she is still watching. Before Olympus stood in triumph, before the sons of Cronus tore down their father and divided the cosmos among themselves, the world was shaped by more ancient hands, and its gods were crueler still. The heavens and the earth had once been locked in embrace, with Uranus stretched across Gaia like a shroud of stars. But Uranus feared the children Gaia bore him, those strange and monstrous offspring that did not resemble mortals or even gods, and he buried them in the bowels of the earth, deep beneath her skin. In her pain and fury, Gaia shaped a plan. She fashioned a sickle of flint and placed it in the hands of her youngest Titan son, Cronus, who took it and lay in wait. When Uranus descended once more to press himself against the earth, Cronus rose and struck. The blade flashed through flesh and sky. Blood rained down upon the soil, but the severed genitals, thrown behind him, fell into the sea. There, amid the churning waves and blood-dark foam, something began to stir. The sea hissed and swirled. From its depths rose a woman fully formed, a creature of such unearthly beauty that even the gods paused to watch. Her hair streamed like golden river reeds. Her skin shimmered like pearl. Where her feet touched the surf, flowers bloomed from salt. She came ashore on the island of Cythera, or perhaps Cyprus, for the tales differ, but in every telling, she was radiant and impossible. They named her Aphrodite, she who was born of the foam, and she walked not with thunder or fire, but with the unbearable ache of desire. From her, the world learned to long. She was older than the Olympians, though she would take her place among them. Zeus gave her to Hephaestus, thinking to tame her with loyalty and craft. But Aphrodite was no wife of stone. She belonged to no one. Her beauty was not meant to be bound. She wandered freely, her eyes forever half-lidded, her laughter sharp and soft all at once. The gods desired her, mortals worshipped her, and wherever she went, the air turned heavy. She did not wield a sword. She did not hurl lightning. Her power was subtler and deeper. It slid beneath armor, It crept into the heart. It twisted vows and shattered kingdoms. No fortress could keep her out. No oath could keep her in. Her love was not always kind. For all her grace, Aphrodite was no gentle muse. She was vengeance clad in silk. When mortals dared compare their beauty to hers, they suffered. When women claimed they were more lovely, she answered with curses. When Hippolytus scorned love itself, preferring chastity in the hunt, she set his stepmother's heart aflame with lust for him, and from that fire came ruin. When she favored a man, the gift was as dangerous as any curse. Anchises, a shepherd prince, caught her eye, and she descended to him in disguise, claiming to be a mortal maiden. When he lay with her and later learned the truth, he trembled in fear. She bore him a son, Aeneas, who would carry a dying city's fate upon his back, but Aphrodite never returned to him. Her most enduring affair was with Ares, god of war. Beauty and blood, pleasure and wrath. They were opposites, and they were alike. She met him not in the softness of bedchambers, but in the violent silence after battle. They lay together beneath golden nets, beneath the eyes of Olympus, and for all the mockery that followed, they did not part. She bore him children, Phobos and Deimos, terror and fear, who rode beside their father into battle. She also gave birth to Harmonia, goddess of concord, as if from that union of war and love might come some balance, however brief. But Aphrodite's greatest legacy was not in the bed or on the battlefield. It was in the tale that ignited the greatest war of myth. For it was she who promised Helen to Paris, the prince of Troy, in return for being named the fairest of goddesses. The judgment of Paris was no game. Hera offered power, Athena offered wisdom and victory, but Aphrodite offered love, and that was stronger than kingdoms. Paris chose her, and in doing so, doomed his city. Helen, the wife of Menelaus, was taken, and the Greeks sailed to Troy with fire in their hearts. 10 years of blood followed. Achilles and Hector fell. Priam wept for his sons, and all because Aphrodite whispered in a prince's ear and smiled. Even among the gods, she was feared, not for might, not for wisdom, but for the madness she could inspire. She could make gods crawl. She could make kings grovel. She could turn brother against brother, father against son, with nothing but a glance. Her magic girdle, the cestus, granted irresistible allure to whoever wore it. Even Hera borrowed it once, in her schemes to distract Zeus. Yet Aphrodite herself needed no trinket. Her presence alone was enough to bend the will. She was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but she was not merciful. She did not love with patience. She did not nurture, she consumed, and yet the world worshipped her. Temples rose across the aisles, statues of smooth marble, eyes cast down in longing, stood in her honor. Men and women alike burned incense at her altars, not out of fear, but out of hope. For who among mortals does not hunger for love, even knowing the cost? Aphrodite, born from the wound of the sky, carried within her the contradiction of all creation, that beauty is both blessing and burden, that love can build kingdoms and unmake them in the same breath, that desire does not yield to law or wisdom or even war. She smiled often, she wept rarely, and in every heart that has ever longed for another, in every glance that lingered too long, in every poem written in firelight, she endures. Among all the gods who sat upon Olympus, cloaked in glory and wreathed in beauty, none bore more scars, none carried a heavier silence than Hephaestus. He was the god of the forge, the shaper of divine will made iron and gold, and yet he was born into the world not with songs and celebration, but with rejection. In the oldest tales, he was cast from the heavens by his mother Hera, who upon seeing her son twisted in leg and form, recoiled with such horror that she flung him from Olympus before he could even cry. He fell for a day and a night, tumbling through cloud and wind, until the sea took him in. There, beneath the waves, he was pulled from the water by Thetis and Eurynome, two sea goddesses, who raised him in secret, far from the laughter of his kin, far from the golden spires and feasts of the immortals. The boy who fell became the man who built. In the deep caverns of the sea, among the fire-warmed stones and singing currents, Hephaestus learned to master the craft of fire. With hammer and anvil, he forged wonders. Metal bent at his will. Flame danced for him like a loyal servant. His arms, though not graceful, grew strong. And in the echoing dark he made things that had never existed before. Mechanical women of bronze, living tools of gold, chains so fine they could not be seen. His work was not born of joy. It was born of silence, of exile, of the long bitterness that festers in the heart of the forgotten. He sent his mother Hera a gift, a throne more splendid than any in the halls of Olympus, etched with silver vines and golden beasts that shimmered when touched by light. But when she sat upon it, the trap was sprung. She could not rise. The throne bound her, gripped her like the judgment she had once passed without thought. The gods begged Hephaestus to release her. They came in turns, with flattery, threats, and bribes. But he refused them all. He had known the sea's cold embrace. He had heard the laughter of the dolphins where his father's voice should have been. He would not come unless brought. And it was Dionysus, the ever-smiling wanderer, who succeeded. He did not argue. He did not plead. He found Hephaestus, offered him wine, and drank with him deep into the night. By dawn, the smith rode back to Olympus upon a mule, drunk but unbent, his hammer slung across his back. He freed Hera, not in submission, but in triumph. And from that day, he claimed his place among the immortals. Yet even in the shining halls of Olympus, Hephaestus was never truly at ease. He was given a wife, the fairest of all goddesses, Aphrodite, radiant and cold as starlight. It was a marriage of arrangement, not affection. Beauty paired with deformity, love chained to labor. She was unfaithful, as many had whispered she would be. Her affair with Ares, bold and reckless, humiliated Hephaestus before the entire pantheon, but he did not rage as Ares would. He did not scream as Poseidon might have. He built a trap, a net so fine it was invisible, spun of threads no mortal could see, and he cast it over the lovers while they slept. Then he summoned the gods, not in fury, but in spectacle, and laid the lovers bare for all Olympus to see. The gods roared with laughter, they mocked and jeered, but Hephaestus did not smile. He stood beside them, silent, the fire in his forge burning low and cold that day. He released them when Poseidon offered payment, not because he needed gold, but because even vengeance could not bring peace. Still, the forge was his dominion. No other god could match his craftsmanship. He built the palaces of Olympus. He forged the aegis for Zeus, a shield that shone like the sun and shook the world with its strike. He made Hermes' winged helmet and sandals, Achilles' unbreakable armor, and the golden chariot of Helios. He carved thrones that moved of their own accord, doors that opened for no one but their master, and automata that could walk and speak like men. His hands, though scarred, were more divine than any voice. His forge was not only the beating heart of Olympus, it was its memory, its legacy, its armor, and yet he was always alone. In later tales, Hephaestus took revenge more quietly. He built Pandora, the first mortal woman, at the gods' command. Crafted of clay and spirit, blessed with gifts from each of the Olympians, she was made beautiful beyond measure. But Hephaestus, who gave her form and breath, knew what she would carry. She was no blessing. She was a vessel, a punishment wrapped in gold. When she opened the jar, not a box, as the poets later called it, the world changed. Sickness, sorrow, madness, and death poured forth. Only hope remained inside, trembling and unseen. It was his hand that shaped her. It was his will that obeyed the decree. But perhaps it was also his bitterness that whispered how to make her eyes too trusting, her hands too eager. Hephaestus was never worshipped for beauty. He was honored in fire, in anvils, in the ringing of hammers on steel. The people of Lemnos, where he was said to have landed after his fall, raised shrines in his name. The volcanic heat was called his breath. The sparks that leapt from the mountain were his laughter. He was not adored like Apollo. He was not feared like Hades. But when mortals needed weapons, when kings needed thrones, when cities rose from dust, they prayed to the god with the limp and the flame. He remained in his forge, always working, always watching. While others feasted and plotted, he built. While others danced and drank, he poured molten bronze. And though the gods might forget him in the songs they sang, they could not do without him. For every victory, every monument, every sacred weapon bore the echo of his fire. And in the end, perhaps that was enough. Hephaestus, the outcast, the maker, the betrayed, forged not only metal, but Olympus itself. He bore no crown, but he shaped them all. On the day Hermes was born, the wind shifted. It was not a great tempest, nor a divine omen, but a quiet change, a trickle of air curling where none had been before. Maia, one of the Pleiades, dwelled in a cave on Mount Selene, far from Olympus, wrapped in solitude and shadow. She bore Zeus's child in silence, without the clamour that usually accompanied the birth of gods. But her son was not a creature of stillness. He came into the world with his eyes open, already watching, already plotting. Before the first dusk of his life had fallen, Hermes had slipped from his swaddling cloth and set off into the world, as if the mountain could not hold him, and his cradle had never been meant to bind him. He would become the god of boundaries, and he began his life by crossing one. That same evening, the infant god reached Thessaly, where Apollo's sacred cattle grazed beneath the sun. Hermes looked upon them, not with reverence, but with mischief. He drove them away, hiding their tracks by fashioning sandals for their hooves and walking them backwards, a trick so clever that not even the far-seeing Apollo could follow the trail. He killed 2, offered sacrifice to himself, and returned to his cave before the dawn, lying once more like a helpless babe, his eyes shut in feigned innocence. But the truth of Olympus is that nothing stays hidden for long. Apollo came, radiant and furious, dragging the child before Zeus to demand justice. And there, in the throne room of the gods, Hermes spoke for the first time, not in plea, but in poetry. With the same breath in which he admitted his theft, he spun tales, sang songs, and laughed at his own audacity. Even Apollo, whose wrath could boil rivers, could not help but smile. Zeus saw himself in the boy. He heard in Hermes' voice the echo of his own younger cunning, and in the boy's grin, the spark of something far more dangerous than brute strength, intelligence untethered by conscience. Rather than punish him, Zeus embraced him. He made him herald of the gods, gave him a golden staff called the caduceus, and tasked him to walk freely between the worlds of gods, mortals, and the dead. From that moment, Hermes bore many names. He was Argephontes, slayer of Argus, the 100-eyed watchman whom he lulled to sleep with stories and song before drawing his blade. He was Psychopomp, the soul guide, who led the dead to the underworld, not with fear, but with calm. He was the guardian of travelers, thieves, merchants, and messengers. Wherever there were crossroads, Hermes stood at the center. He was not mighty like Zeus. He was not golden like Apollo. He was not solemn like Hades. But Hermes moved faster than any of them. His winged sandals barely kissed the ground, and his mind moved faster still. When Hera sought to torment Io, Zeus's mortal lover, by placing her under Argus's watchful guard, it was Hermes who came to her rescue. With stories sweet as honey and music soft as wine, he put Argus to sleep, blade in hand. His dagger was quick, but his wit was quicker. The eyes of Argus, after death, were set into the feathers of Hera's peacock, a bitter tribute. Hermes did not only walk in shadow, he brought invention. He crafted the first lyre from a tortoise shell, sinew, and ingenuity, and gifted it to Apollo as a peace offering. He gave mankind weights and measures, coinage and commerce, speech and calculation. Yet he remained ever untrustworthy. He lied as easily as he breathed. He tricked not for need, but for pleasure. But even his deceptions carried the glimmer of genius. He was the god of the in-between, where chaos and order met in handshake or blade. In battle, he carried the messages of Zeus. On fields of blood and glory, it was Hermes who whispered orders into the ears of kings, who lifted dying warriors from the dust and bore them unseen from the slaughter. During the Trojan War, it was Hermes who guided Priam into the Greek camp, cloaked in divine mist, to beg for the body of Hector. Not even Achilles, roaring and wrathful, could deny the solemnity of that moment. Hermes stood behind the old king like a shadow, watching, silent, bearing witness. He was not often in the tales of war, but he was always there, between every word, every pause, every unspoken vow. He had many lovers, though few were stories sung in temples. His son Pan, born of a nymph, was a god of the wild, of madness, of pipes and panic, goat-legged and howling. Some said he fathered Hermaphroditus, child of Aphrodite, who bore both manhood and womanhood, twin in form. Hermes did not love in constancy. He loved in moments, in flashes, in games played beneath the moon. Temples to Hermes rose at borders and gates, crossroads and marketplaces, places where decisions were made and fates were changed. Travelers offered him stone cairns, piled high to mark a safe path. Thieves whispered his name before the theft. Merchants carved his image into their scales, and the dying, as they gasped their last, hoped to see him not in wrath, but in mercy, to have their souls carried not by darkness, but by a figure who smiled, even at the end. For all his cunning, Hermes was never cruel. He was not a god of justice, but he played fair in his own way. He balanced the weight of the world between trick and truth, lie and law. He was the boundary that made movement possible. And as the world turned, as cities rose and fell, as armies marched and ships sank, Hermes walked unseen, smiling to himself, forever moving between what was, what is, and what might be. Before the wars in heaven, before the forging of thunder and the clash of titans, before even the rise of the 12 upon Olympus, there was Hestia. She was the eldest daughter of Cronus and Rhea, the firstborn of that ancient brood. and she came into the world quietly, her cries soft and brief. Her father swallowed her whole, as he did each of his children, fearing the prophecy that one of them would overthrow him. Inside the belly of Cronus, she waited in the darkness with her siblings, her flame banked but unextinguished. When Zeus rose and fulfilled the ancient doom, he split open the old god's belly and brought his brothers and sisters forth again into the light. Hestia was the last to be freed, though she had been the first to be taken. Yet she bore no resentment. She emerged not in fury, but in peace, as if her long confinement had only deepened her stillness. And from that moment, she asked for little. While her brothers sought dominion over sea and sky, and her sisters turned their eyes to wisdom and harvest, Hestia chose the hearth. She asked Zeus for no temples, no golden chariot, no armies to bear her name. She wished only to keep the flame that warmed the house, that lit the meal, that marked the center of every home and city. She became the goddess of the hearth, and in that small, humble choice, she claimed a power deeper than any thunderbolt. For when the storms rage and empires fall, the hearth remains. It is the first fire lit in the morning and the last to die at night. It is the circle where family gathers, where sacrifices are made, where gods are fed, and where oaths are sworn. In every home where offerings were made, Hestia received the first and the last portion, for she was the beginning and the end of every rite. Her presence was not one of spectacle. There are no great battles told in her name, no lovers, no betrayals, no monstrous offspring or terrible vengeance. She did not stride into war, nor descend into the underworld. She stayed, always, and in that stillness she held the world together. While the other Olympians quarreled, while they seduced and schemed and spilled blood upon the earth, Hestia tended the fire that kept Olympus warm. It was she who kept the sacred flame alive in every city. In Rome, she would be called Vesta, and her priestesses would guard the eternal fire under threat of death. In Greece, her altars never cooled. Even when a new city was founded, the settlers would carry a brand from Hestia's sacred flame to light the hearth in the new land. Without her, there was no home, no polis, no beginning. Though she was courted by gods as mighty as Poseidon and Apollo, she turned them both away with calm grace. She asked Zeus to allow her to remain forever a virgin, untouched and undemanded. He granted her this, and in exchange she took no seat upon the Olympian council. She gave hers to Dionysus, the youngest god, the bringer of madness and vine. She did not weep at the loss. She had no need of thrones or titles. Her power was not in hierarchy, but in necessity. While the others thundered in temples of marble, Hestia lingered in the smallest flame of the poorest home, in the soft breath of warmth against a child's cheek, in the smoke curling upward from a shepherd's meal on a cold mountain. She was worshipped in silence, not song. There are few tales of her, and yet she is in every story. When Odysseus returned home, it was to the hearth Hestia blessed. When Agamemnon's halls were torn apart by murder and vengeance, the hearth's light was the first to falter. When cities rose in conquest, their laws were sworn beside her flame. When lovers wed, they touched her fire for fortune. And in the hours before dawn, when no other god stirred, she watched over the sleeping world, as she always had. The poets found little drama in her. They passed over her name in favor of battle and seduction. But the wise remembered, the hearth is what a house becomes only once it is lit. The hearth is what remains when all else is gone. A kingdom without a throne may still endure, but a home without a hearth is a ruin. And Hestia, eldest and youngest, forgotten and remembered, was never absent. In the end, she stood alone, not because she was cast out or driven away, but because she had chosen solitude. And in that solitude, she was loved not with passion or fear, but with reverence. For every fire sparked in her name, for every offering cast into the flame, her name lived on. She was the goddess of warmth, of safety, of return. When men lost everything and came back to ashes, it was Hestia's breath that stirred the first smoke once more. She needed no myth. She was the quiet truth beneath them all. Among the Olympians, there were gods of sky and gods of sea, gods of war and fire and wine, but only one whose sorrow could wither the earth, whose grief could turn abundance into dust. Demeter, the daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was the goddess of the grain, of harvest, of tilled fields and golden stalks. She was not clothed in jewels or crowned in light. Her hands were calloused, her skin carried the scent of soil and wind. She wore the green mantle of spring and walked barefoot across the furrows of the earth. Mortals loved her, not in terror, but in gratitude. She brought them bread. She taught them the ways of planting and reaping. Without her, kings starved like beggars, and cities cracked open like husks. Yet Demeter's heart, though broad as the plains of Arcadia, was ruled by one love above all, the love of her daughter. Persephone was born of Zeus, fair as a new bloom, laughing as she danced among meadows and rivers, untouched by shadow, her footsteps light as petals. She was her mother's joy and mirror, and Demeter never let her far from her sight. The gods watched her grow. Even Hades, stern and silent in his kingdom below, watched her. His heart, which had never known longing, stirred at the sight of her youth. He said nothing to Demeter. He sought no blessing. He rose from the underworld in a chariot, black as pitch, drawn by horses whose breath smoked like fire, and seized the girl as she picked flowers in the vale of Nysa. The earth yawned open. The meadow was split, and by the time her companions screamed, Persephone was gone. Demeter searched the world. She walked across the fields she had once blessed, her hair unbound, her robes torn, her voice hoarse from calling. For 9 days and nights, she wandered without food or rest, bearing torches in both hands. Not even the gods dared to speak to her, for her grief was a storm without lightning, a silence more terrible than rage. She came at last to the house of Hecate, who had heard the girl's cry, and together they turned to Helios, the all-seeing sun. It was he who told the truth, that Hades had taken her, and that Zeus, father and king, had given his silent consent. Demeter turned away from Olympus. She cast off her divinity and walked the earth as a mortal. She came to Eleusis, where she sat beside a well, cloaked and unrecognizable. The daughters of King Celeus found her there and brought her to their mother, who welcomed the strange woman into her home. Demeter nursed the queen's son, Demophoon, and in secret tried to make him immortal, laying him in fire each night to burn away his mortal weakness. But the queen saw and screamed. The ritual was broken. Demeter revealed herself not in wrath, but in sorrow, and in her grief, she cursed the land. Nothing grew. The grain rotted in the field. Trees bore no fruit. The rivers ran slow and silted. Famine crept across the world like a shadow, and the smoke of dying hearths rose toward Olympus. Men and women prayed, not for favor, but for survival. And finally, Zeus relented. He sent Hermes down into the underworld to bring the girl back. Hades did not fight. He spoke gently, with the voice of a husband who knew he had done what could not be undone. He offered Persephone a throne beside his own. She had not wept. She had not screamed. But her silence had hardened, like the roots of old trees. And before she left, she took from him a single fruit, a pomegranate, blood red and bitter. She ate 6 seeds. So it was that Persephone returned to the world above, and the fields wept with joy. Demeter ran to her daughter, held her as if she could never let go. But the fates do not forget. Because she had eaten of the food of the dead, Persephone could not remain. For 6 months of the year, she would walk beneath the sun, and the flowers would bloom in her wake. But for 6 months more, she would return to the realm of shadows, a queen not stolen but enthroned, and the earth would mourn. In her sorrow, Demeter withholds her gifts. The winds grow cold. The trees cast off their leaves. The fields turn to frost. And so the seasons came into the world, not by decree, but by love, lost and regained, again and again. Demeter accepted this bargain, though her heart never healed. She founded the Eleusinian Mysteries, rites so sacred and secret that even the poets dared not write them down. They promised a glimpse of Persephone's path, a hope of rebirth, the whisper that death was not the end. Mortals came from every land to walk the sacred road, to be initiated into her rites. They fasted and prayed and wept. And in the dark, they saw something bright, a memory, a promise, a mother's fire. Demeter was not often seen upon Olympus. She kept to the fields, to the temples where fires were lit and loaves were broken. She was no queen of thunder or tide, but when the people ate, they named her first. And when the snow fell and the harvest failed, they knew it was because a mother waited for her child to rise from the dark once more. Persephone was not born for darkness. She came into the world beneath the eyes of Demeter, her mother's laughter woven into her breath, her skin the color of ripened grain. She was called Kore, the maiden, the flower of spring. In the meadows of the mortal world she danced, untouched by age or grief, and wherever her feet touched the grass, wildflowers burst from the soil. She knew nothing of sorrow, for her mother kept sorrow at bay. She was the daughter of growth, of golden fields and clear skies. And yet, no god or mortal can outrun the shadow that waits beneath the earth. The world was not made to be only light. There is always a door beneath the root. There is always a silence beneath the song. It was in one such meadow that her fate caught her. She stooped to pluck a narcissus, the bloom so pale and bright that it seemed conjured. In that moment, the ground broke open, not with thunder, not with war, but with inevitability. Hades, lord of the underworld, rose from the chasm with a chariot of black iron and horses, whose hooves sparked fire. He reached out and took her. She screamed. The earth closed, and the world changed. He did not demand her love, but he offered her power. No other goddess ruled as she did there. No one defied her. She was not the girl who had danced in her mother's fields. She had descended, and the world had not followed. She sat beside Hades in silence, and something within her began to settle. It was not happiness, but it was certainty. When Hermes came to retrieve her, bearing Zeus's command and Demeter's sorrow, she did not rush to him. She listened. She weighed the world she had left against the one she had come to know. And then, as if she knew what must come, she ate. 6 seeds of a pomegranate, crimson and bitter. It was a choice, or perhaps the memory of one. The fruit bound her to the underworld, not forever, but for part of the year, half in shadow, half in light, bride of two worlds. When she returned to her mother, spring followed. The trees blossomed, the frost melted, the birds returned. But Kor was gone. She was Persephone now. She had seen the dead. She had ruled them. She had worn the iron crown. And though she smiled for her mother, there was a quietness in her eyes that had not been there before. She did not speak of what she had seen. Those who die do not return, but she had. And in her return was written the cycle of all things, the seed, the stalk, the harvest, and the fall. In the underworld, she came to be feared and worshipped as much as her husband, not for cruelty, for justice, for knowing. The Erinyes, the Furies, served her as they served him. The souls of the dead knelt before her as queen. She was not warmth, but she was not cold. She was the stillness in the tomb, the rustle of poppies at a grave, the soft voice that reminds mortals that all things must sleep, even gods. She was honored in Eleusis beside Demeter, in rites that whispered of death and rebirth. Initiates carried torches and fasted, seeking a glimpse of her path, the promise that even in death, something stirs. She was not sung of in war. She was not invoked by sailors or kings, but every field bowed to her. Every grave was hers. Every mother who buried a child cried out to her in silence. Persephone did not choose her fate, but she shaped it. She wore no chains. She was not weeping in the dark. She was sovereign. And each year when she rose from the underworld and the crocus bloomed, she reminded the world that even what is lost may return, though never unchanged. Her story was not tragedy. It was truth. That joy and sorrow are never far apart, that the earth feeds on both. And so she endures, in myth and memory, queen of spring and shadow, a goddess not of one realm, but of the threshold between. Long after the thrones of Olympus had been carved from cloud and marble, long after the Titans had been bound and the world divided between sky and sea and shadow, there came one who did not belong. He was not born into the cold splendor of Olympus, nor did he rise with spear or thunder in hand. Dionysus came into the world in secrecy, in sorrow, and in fire. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal woman of Thebes, and his story began not with war, but with a whisper. Semele was beautiful, and Zeus, ever wandering, came to her in disguise. But Hera, queen of heaven and wife to the king of gods, saw the shadow of infidelity bloom once more and moved against it with slow cruelty. She came to Semele as an old woman, kind and gentle, and planted the seed of doubt. If he truly is Zeus, she said, should he not reveal himself to you in his true form? And so Semele, caught between faith and fear, begged Zeus to come to her as he came to Hera. Zeus had sworn to grant her any wish, and bound by his oath, he obeyed. When he appeared in his divine glory, crowned in lightning, wrapped in celestial fire, the sight of him burned her to ash. But from her womb, he rescued the unborn child. He sewed the infant into his own thigh, carrying him there until he was ready to be born once more. And so Dionysus came into the world twice, once of woman, once of God. He was a child of death and life, of mortal ruin and immortal spark. And from the moment he cried out, the world trembled with something new. He would never fit in the orderly halls of Olympus. His power was not in dominion, but in unraveling. Zeus, knowing Hera's wrath would not be cooled, sent the boy away in secret. He was raised first by Hermes, then by the nymphs of Nysa, far from Olympus, in wild groves where vines crept over stone and music never stopped. There, Dionysus grew not like Apollo, straight and golden, but sideways, curling like ivy. He discovered the grape, the press, the cup. He drank, laughed, wept, danced, and taught others to do the same. But his joy was not simple. It was dangerous. Wherever he walked, reason softened, and the walls men built between themselves and their beasts cracked. As he grew, he wandered. He was a god without a home. He moved through Phrygia, Thrace, India. He came not with spears, but with drums, not with soldiers, but with women. The Maenads followed him, their hair unbound, their eyes bright with frenzy. They tore animals limb from limb. They danced until their feet bled. They howled his name not in prayer, but in ecstasy. He was the god of wine, but not the mild sip of a cup in a king's hand. He was the god of intoxication, of letting go, of losing oneself in something greater, in madness, in music, in ritual. Yet those who denied him suffered. Pentheus, king of Thebes, cousin to Dionysus, mocked the god, called him a fraud, and forbade his worship. Dionysus came to him in disguise, soft-spoken and persuasive. He lured the king to the forest, dressed him as a woman, and led him to the Maenads. In their frenzy, they mistook him for a beast. His own mother, Agave, struck the first blow. When her eyes cleared, she saw the truth too late. She carried her son's head on a thyrsus, shrieking in triumph, and the god was nowhere to be seen. Dionysus did not rage. He did not raise his hand. He showed men the madness they kept within themselves, and then stepped aside as it bloomed. He returned at last to Olympus, not with supplication, but with inevitability. The 12 thrones were set, but Hestia, eldest and humblest, surrendered hers, and Dionysus, youngest and wildest, took it. He belonged not by birthright, but by proof. He had walked the world. He had shown mortals both delight and despair. He had died and returned. No other god could say the same. Dionysus became a symbol not only of joy, but of paradox. He was the god of theatre, where truth is hidden behind masks. He was the god of wine, which heals and destroys. He was the god of ritual madness, of possession, of that thin and trembling line between ecstasy and horror. His temples were forests. His rites were secret. His followers laughed with tears in their eyes. His was not the worship of reason, but of surrender. He was never truly tame. Even among the gods, he moved like smoke. One moment, a laughing youth with ivy in his hair, the next a grim figure crowned in serpents. His power was not forged in battle. It was awakened in revelry. His victory was not over monsters, but over restraint itself. And in every cup of wine, in every dance that forgets the world, in every mask that hides a second face, Dionysus still moves. He was twice born. He was never meant to rule, but he made the world feel what it feared to admit. That order is a lie, and beneath the stone temples and sacred laws, there waits the truth of frenzy, of transformation, and of letting go. The gods of Olympus no longer walk among us. Their temples have crumbled, their oracles have gone silent, their statues lie buried beneath moss and ash, but they were once everywhere. Their names were whispered with awe, carved into stone, etched into the hearts of kings and slaves alike. They shaped the lives of mortals with laughter and wrath, lust and vengeance, caprice and favor. They governed not from some distant heaven, but from mountaintop palaces just out of reach. They were not perfect. They were not always just. But they were present, a mirror to the mortal soul, magnified to divine proportion. And yet, time is the one God no other can defy. The old rites faded. The torches of Eleusis were extinguished. The feasts of Dionysus gave way to altars of another kind. Temples that once rang with song now house sheep and dust. And still, the Olympians endure. Not in thunder, not in glory, but in stories. They live in the rustle of pages, in the hush before a tale begins, in the hush after it ends. Their myths are not forgotten. They have merely changed their form. Zeus, who once ruled the skies with a clenched fist, now appears in the faces of kings, fathers, and tyrants. Poseidon, who shattered islands with his rage, is felt in every storm and shipwreck. Athena stands behind every wise decision, every clever war, every noble city. Apollo lives in music and prophecy, in the fever dream of art and sunlight. Artemis remains in forests untamed, in moonlight that touches the lonely path. Ares is found in every battlefield, not with a spear, but in the roar of bombs and the silence that follows. Hephaestus is there in the ring of hammer on steel, in every bridge and weapon, in every machine that bears man's ambition and suffering. Hermes flickers in every message, every word carried swiftly across continents, in every thief's grin. Hestia burns in every hearth, in every act of welcome, in the quiet center of a home. Demeter waits with the seeds, with the plough, in every famine and harvest. Persephone walks alongside every mourner, her hands cool and steady, the promise of spring in her eyes. And Dionysus dances still, in the revel, the madness, the ecstasy that tears the world open and rebuilds it again and again. Some say the gods were never real, that they were dreams born of fear and firelight, but others say they were more than real. They were necessary, not because they were gods, but because they were us, made immense. They fought, they loved, they betrayed, they forgave. They demanded worship, not to be adored, but because through them, mortals could glimpse something beyond themselves. The divine was never meant to be distant. It lived in the soil, the sea, the blood. It still does. In the end, Olympus was never only a place. It was a mirror. It was the high place where men looked up and saw something like themselves, writ vast and terrible, beautiful and broken. And though the gods no longer answer prayers, though no thunder rolls in reply to offerings burned, their stories remain. They endure because we endure, and perhaps that is their truest immortality. When the wind rises through the ruins of Delphi, when the moon casts shadows across a forgotten altar, when a story is told by firelight and a child's eyes widen with wonder, the gods stir, not in power, in memory, in myth, and in that they remain eternal.